put, Roe v. Wade got it wrong. I yield back the time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. I'd like to now yield to my good friend and colleague from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
Mr. Speaker, 41 years ago, the Supreme Court issued its tragic Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion on demand in the United States. Since that ruling, there have been about 56 million abortions performed. This abhorrent practice remains one of the most common medical procedures in the U.S. It is perpetrated by a perverse logic that the life of an unplanned child does not possess the same value as that of any other child. As the parents of 5 children and grandparents of 2, my wife Jeannie and I understand just how precious each and every child's life is. I believe every life is a gift from God, and I remain wholly committed to protecting the sanctity of human life. Today, I want to recognize the more than 2,300 pregnancy care centers in the United States working to defend the lives of the unborn and providing critical services and support for women who find themselves in unplanned pregnancies. Sadly, many women facing an unplanned pregnancy in the U.S. are told and believe abortion is the only way. Pregnancy care centers respect these women and the lives they are carrying throughout their pregnancies. In my congressional district, we are fortunate to have one of these champions working to defend the sanctity of human life. Life Networks has been serving Colorado Springs for over 25 years. Through the support of selfless men and women devoted to a culture of life, Life Network, through the Colorado Springs Pregnancy Center, provides pregnancy tests, counseling, ultrasounds, and material assistance, such as diapers, formula, and baby clothing. All of these services are free of charge. Life Network and pregnancy care centers like it across the world have and will continue to reduce abortion rates, save unborn lives, and provide assistance and resources to encourage women faced with unplanned pregnancies so they can choose life. I mourn the lives cut short by abortion. I pray that God continues to give favor to those compassionate individuals who give of their time in pregnancy care centers, and that He give His grace and comfort to those touched by this awful practice. I will continue to be among those fighting to stop it. Thank you, Representative Smith, for your leadership on this issue, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lamborn. I'd like to now yield to my friend from Texas, Mr. Nagelbauer. Randy.
I thank the gentleman. Next Wednesday is a very solemn day in America. It's the 41st anniversary of Roe versus Wade. And, you know, I think that was the day that a blemish was put on America. A blemish put on a country that was founded on the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But unfortunately, we denied almost 56 million individuals that opportunity. A lot of people use the word choice when they talk about abortion. But unfortunately, we didn't give 56 million people a choice. One of the great pleasures of my life was just spent Christmas with my family, and more importantly with my children and my grandchildren. I have two sons and 4 grandchildren. One of the pleasures that Dan and I have on our mantle at home in our bedroom are the sonograms of each of our grandchildren. Our first glimpse at what our loving grandchildren were going to look like, and a clear indication that life begins at conception. So my hope is, while I'm here in Congress, and I'll continue the fight, is that we remove this blemish from this great nation, that we make this a nation recommitted to those principles that was founded on of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we cannot be a nation of life, truly can we uphold any principles? Thank you.
Thank my friend for his very wise comments and very eloquent comments. I'd like to now yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMava.
Thank you. Thank you, my colleague from New Jersey, and for leading this discussion here tonight. Indeed, it's a very somber tone that we would be here on a very, indeed, sad subject matter. as the 41st anniversary of Roe v. Wade is brought forward here in our history. You know, I rise today in strong support of the sanctity of human life, and I know we have, as a society, an obligation to protect life in all of its forms, especially the unborn. We're confronted today by a culture that takes human life for granted and the sanctity of it. Indeed, we heard a little bit earlier that since the 41-year history of Roe v. Wade, that a decision made by a court, legislated by a court, that 56 million unborn have had their lives taken, which I think is really an unconscionable injustice for our nation. I am a pro-life advocate. Regardless of the political or status quo, I'm proud to join my colleagues in protecting the rights of the unborn and preserving the sanctity of human life. I'm a Christian, father of 4, have daughters, have sisters, have nieces. A lot of women in my life, our family's life. Of course, nothing replaces the great joy you would have in holding one of your own newborn or those of relatives or friends, and what that means, the miracle that God has given us. Watching them grow, watching them go on to become successful. How would you want to take that away? I don't understand it. Now, I know, obviously, it's a controversial subject, but we fall short as a country sometimes is that a lot of times, many times, is that women are in a position to have to make a difficult decision sometimes. That they may believe the only position they have is the termination of a pregnancy. At the very least, we ought to be able to stand here and make sure they have all the information on all the implications, all the options, instead of sometimes a rush to make what can be a very tragic and long-lasting decision. The fight goes on. It won't end anytime soon. But in the long-term picture, standing up for the rights of the unborn as well as the sanctity of all human life, I think, is something that's essential if we're to have a belief system in something bigger than ourselves. So I hope we as a nation can do better. And I appreciate that there's folks willing to stand forward. I appreciate those folks from the doctors that spoke here tonight that are there providing women's health and the health of the unborn and those already born, that they have that perspective they brought to us as well. So with that, I appreciate the time, and I yield back.
I thank my friend. I'd like to now yield to Mr. Pittenger.
Thank you, Congressman Smith. I'm so grateful for your leadership. Having known you now for the last 30 years and watched the true commitment that you have to the cause of life. I appreciate the spirit of which you come and your dedication. Mr. Speaker, before I got in Congress, I spent a lot of time committed to the pro-life mission. And my interest really was elevated about 25 years ago when I was in London with my family. And we visited the British Museum. And after a long day, we were tired, and we went into a little booth and sat down a number of chairs, and there was a little TV screen. And I just pushed the button to see what was there. And what came on but a little film about life and about birth and about this little baby. And they referred to the baby time and again. The baby is a week old. The baby is 2 weeks old. The baby is 3 weeks old. And here's a chart, Mr. Speaker, that shows that baby, and at 3 weeks, 4 weeks, has the eye and the heart, 5 weeks, greater development with the limbs, 6 weeks, adding the teeth and the palate and the ear. And you'll see there, Mr. Speaker, about the 16th week, the brain is fully formed. And at that point, it's fully formed, the nervous system is in. That baby can feel pain. So I want those who can see us today and feel the heart and commitment that this is a baby. And this is the life of that baby as it's processed. The Lord said, I knew you even when you were in your mother's womb. And this is something that we cannot remove ourselves from. You know, as you think of this baby and the loss of these babies, some 56 million, your mind's eye looks through all of recorded history and what has happened in the period of history that those babies were born, and what would have happened with their lives. Did we eliminate the life of one who would have helped to cure cancer or diabetes or any other disease? Was that life taken that God had put in that little baby's mind and heart, the knowledge to do what was needed to be done to cure a major disease today? We'll never know that till eternity. And for that, I think it's a very sober thought to know that the Lord watches over us day and night, and His thoughts toward us are good and not of evil, to give us a future and a hope. He has hope to all. And we need to respect the fact and know the fact that that loving God provided this life to be a blessing on this earth. And it is something that we should consider very seriously, the impact of what's happened in God's plan for this earth by what we have taken away from the lives that He's given. So I share this time with you, and I'm grateful for your leadership. And as I join with you next week, this will be a moment to continue to ask God to help preserve these lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pitcher. I'd like to yield to Chairman Franks, Chairman of the Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, and a very inquire of the Chair how much time is left.
The gentleman has about 2 minutes remaining.
Okay. Let me yield to the Chair. Okay. Sure. Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support the rights of the unborn and to urge my colleagues to do everything within their legal power to help protect the most innocent and defenseless citizens of our great nation. I served as a doctor for nearly 30 years in northern Michigan, and I know that life begins at conception, and that protection for that life must start at conception. As a father and grandfather, I've been blessed to experience this miracle on my own family. I think everyone believes the government should protect children. We ensure their health, their safety, their well-being, and I, along with many in northern Michigan, believe that life inside the womb is just as precious as life outside the womb, and that it must be protected. Because of this belief that the lives of the unborn deserve protection, I have worked hard to prevent taxpayer funding of abortion. I join with the majority of my Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives in supporting H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. Your hard-earned tax dollars should not pay for abortions, especially when such highly controversial practices are opposed by most taxpayers. January 22nd, next Wednesday, marks the 41st anniversary of Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. After 41 years of passion and engagement, I'd like to commend the grassroots efforts of our local communities, led by Northern Michigan advocates for the unborn. Thank you for the hard work that you do to educate our communities about this important debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pettinger. Just to close, Mr. Speaker, 41 years ago next week, January 22nd, marks the U.S. Supreme Court's infamous, reckless, and inhumane abandonment of women and babies to abortionists. 41 years of victims, dead babies, wounded women, shattered families. 41 years of government-sanctioned violence against women and children. Since 1973, more than 56 million children have been killed by abortion, a staggering loss of children's precious lives, a death toll that equates with the entire population of England. The passage of time hasn't changed the fact that abortion is a serious, lethal violation of fundamental human rights, and that women and children deserve better, and that the demands of justice, generosity, and compassion require that the right to life be guaranteed to everyone. Rather than dull our consciences to the unmitigated violence of abortion, The passage of time has only enabled us to see and, frankly, better understand the innate cruelty of abortion and its horrific legacy, victims, while making us more determined than ever to protect the weakest and the most vulnerable. All life is sacred, Mr. Speaker. No one, regardless of sex, race, religion, disability, or condition of dependency, is a throwaway. All of us, especially lawmakers and policymakers everywhere in this town and throughout the country, have a profound moral duty to protect the innocent and the inconvenient. I yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman's time has expired. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Pocan, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's an honor to be here on behalf of the Progressive Caucus and lead this special order hour. Last week, we were here as a Progressive Caucus with a number of our members talking about the need to extend unemployment benefits for the 1.3 million Americans that lost them at the end of December. And we had so much, we filled the entire hour with people talking about the need to extend the benefits and real personal stories of people who've been affected by us not in this House extending those benefits. It looked for a while last week like the Senate might do the right thing in a bipartisan way and extend those benefits. And unfortunately, this week we saw the Republicans in the Senate refuse to go along and extend benefits to needy Americans, people who are without work, simply trying to pay their rent, pay for their groceries, and pay for things like gas so they can go and get a job. It's been a very unfortunate week. And yet in this House, we have tried time after time this week to get a vote so that we could get unemployment benefits extended for that 1.3 million Americans and the 72,000 Americans each and every week that are going to lose those benefits. And unfortunately, we have had no success. The leadership in this House has not allowed us to have that vote. So we are here again today to talk about not only the need to extend unemployment benefits, but also to talk about a fast-track deal that's going through this House, a fast-track deal on trade that many of us see as a fast-track to losing even more jobs and having an even more detrimental effect to the very same people we're talking about right now who are becoming more and more long-term unemployed. I am joined by a number of my colleagues today, and I would like to right off the bat yield to a colleague of mine who has served in the California legislature, now proudly serves the Long Beach area here in Congress, my good friend and colleague, Representative Alan Lowenthal from California.
Well, thank you. I thank the gentleman from Wisconsin for yielding to me. I rise, too, in support of the 1.3 million Americans who have lost or will be losing their benefits by the callous efforts of this Congress not to extend unemployment benefits, especially for the long-term unemployed. You know, as you pointed out, as of Mr. Pocan, Congressman Pocan, that as of December 28th, over 1.3 million Americans have been kicked off unemployment insurance. We're talking about, and I'm going to speak in a few minutes about the personal impacts of this. We're talking about family members. We're talking about friends. We're talking about people in our own, in each and every community of every member, regardless of political affiliation in this Congress. In my own community, in the state of California, we're talking about, if we look at and we continue this callous effort not to extend unemployment benefits, we're looking at over 325,000 Californians losing their benefit in the next 6 months. We're talking about, let's talk about jobs. People say that, you know, people should be working. We're talking about the impact, if we do not extend unemployment insurance, of the loss of in my state, over 240,000 jobs. This is a tragedy for our country. And, you know, we're just coming out of the holiday season. It's really interesting that in the holiday season, in the Christmas time, that there was a lack of compassion by the majority party in the House who did not put up a bill to extend unemployment insurance. Congressman Pocan and I have looked at this and are asking our colleagues, you know, we're coming up, the President of the United States is going to be talking about the State of the Union. There is nothing more important in the Union than having people be able to buy their food, to be able to feed their children, to be able to hold their head up with dignity. And so last year, the House Democrats invited as their one guest people who are victims of gun violence. This year, Congressman, I applaud you for taking the lead, and I am so pleased to have joined you in a letter to ask Republicans and Democrats to use their one member, their one additional seat, to bring to Congress to let the President and the rest of the nation hear about the stories and that put a face to those people who have lost their unemployment insurance, to see that these are people like our neighbors. That's who we're talking about. And I urge every member of Congress to bring a person with them to listen to who doesn't normally have a chance to impact our government, to bring with them a person who has lost their unemployment insurance. I want to talk a little bit about some of the people in my community. Letters, people that I've met, people that I've gone and talked to. For example, I'll just give two examples. I have a constituent who recently spoke to me about being 76 years of age and widowed. And her daughter is 52, is a civil engineer, has worked for many years at good jobs in the construction industry, building water treatment plants around the state of California. She was laid off 3 years ago and has not been able to find work since, even for jobs that pay much less. And even for, she's been, you know, she would be willing to take jobs that pay up to less than a third of her previous salary. After her unemployment checks moved out, she moved in with her mother, who wrote to me and spoke to me. Luckily, she says, when she and I were both employed, we bought this small house, and we worked diligently to pay it off. Her daughter, has pretty much given up hope for another job, and I'm somewhat crippled now. Between my Social Security and my savings, we survive. My point is, I'm writing to you not to help us. She did not ask for any help, but she said, we're doing okay, but she knows that so many people in her community are not doing well, are going through the same thing that she and her daughter have gone through, but they don't have now insurance to do that. And she asked me, she pleaded with me to extend the benefits and to extend their unemployment checks. Another constituent wrote to me recently and said, I'm 58 years of age, I'm a telecommunication analyst, I was laid off in January of 2013. I have worked for over 30 years in this field. Now I need the government to help me through this rough time, and you and your peers are letting me down. I'm running out of savings. I'm soon to be homeless by the end of March if you don't do something. And I'm at a point that I take any job available, but I've not heard any, but all I hear is either I'm overqualified or I don't fit well into the job. I think we have to really hear this. This person pleaded, I am not a lazy person. I am out there trying every single day to find a job. I would give up one of my fingers for a job just to take care of my family. Please, she said, please keep fighting to help us out. Both of these stories tell us how we have a responsibility to help the women and the men and the families in our community who are the foundation of our society and who are raising the next generation, who really are saying, I've worked hard, please, at this tough time, don't abandon me. If we can, and they're saying, if we cannot provide adequate support for our families to make it through difficult times, they're saying, asking to us, why, if you're not here to help us, why are you in Congress if you're not here? When we extend unemployment insurance, UI, the U.S. economy goes up, poverty goes down, and working families are protected. Now is not the time to turn our backs on the most vulnerable in our society. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, and thank you, Representative Lowenthal, not only for helping share those stories and putting a personal face on people who are affected when we don't extend these benefits and do our jobs. But I'm glad to be joining you and others who will bring someone at the State of the Union, someone who can put that personal face and be here in Washington, D.C. to tell their story. So as the President talks about things like income inequality and the need to pass the minimum wage increase and the need to extend employment benefits, I'm glad to have someone from Wisconsin, as you'll have someone from California, and hopefully we'll have a lot of other people that can share their stories. So thank you so much for that.
And thank you for that leadership.
Yeah. I now would like to yield to a colleague of mine who has done an outstanding job in representing people across not just her state of California, but this country. She's the chair of our Democratic Whip's Task Force on Poverty and Opportunity and has done a tremendous job in speaking out about what we need to do to make sure that those who are living in poverty have equal access to opportunity like every American should. It's my honor to yield some time to Representative Barbara Lee from California.
Thank you very much. Let me thank the gentleman for yielding and for his kind remarks. And also let me thank you for your tremendous leadership on so many issues which address and affect the American people across the board. But also thank you for being here every week during these special orders, really raising the level of awareness on the critical issues of our day. So it takes a lot to do this, but thank you for giving us a voice and the opportunity to be with you. And I join you and our colleagues tonight in the Congressional Progressive Caucus really in strong opposition to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we're talking about trying to ensure that people do not fall into the ranks of the poor, but also people have pathways out of poverty into prosperity. Here now we're looking at another bill, H.R. 3080, which is called the Bipartisan Trade Priorities Act of 2014, which would provide the administration with fast-track authority for the TPP. Once again, this is not a progressive trade policy. It will not allow for people to be employed and get good paying jobs, but rather just the opposite. So unfortunately, looking at this really worries many of us that we will fall backwards in terms of more people becoming unemployed. And so let me just be clear up front, though. I do not oppose all trade agreements. I support fair and free trade. However, the notion that Congress should provide a rubber stamp for a complex free trade agreement is simply really irresponsible and dangerous to our economy and to our constituents. They elected us to provide a voice into all of these policies, and to shut the Congress out of having that seat at the table, to me, is downright undemocratic. The TPP will have a devastating effect on the working class families and communities of color that I represent and that many of us represent. It would sacrifice the well-being of working Americans for the wealth of multinational corporations. Not to mention that in its current form, the TPP would lock in higher prices for popular drugs, threatening access to life-saving medicines, including HIV/AIDS drugs, for millions of poor and low-income individuals and families around the world. By exporting American jobs to countries where the minimum wage is just 28 cents an hour, CEOs will continue to get richer while working Americans lose their only source of income. Now, we've seen this happen before. Past trade agreements have already cost us 3.4 million service sector jobs. Many of those jobs were in California. We simply cannot afford to lose more. NAFTA alone resulted in the net loss of 1 million U.S. jobs. It led to a trade deficit of $181 billion, and it devastated the manufacturing sector. These agreements have allowed corporations to ship good American jobs overseas while wages, benefits, and workforce and workplace protections and environmental protections are really declined and denied. Rather than focusing on trade agreements that will hurt the middle class, we really should be focusing on job creation, eradicating poverty, income inequality, and improving economic mobility. In 1980, CEOs were paid an average of 42 times the salary of a blue-collar worker. In 2012, that number exploded to 354 times more than the average worker. 354 times. This is unacceptable. It's really unconscionable that rather than building pathways to prosperity, we are debating measures to make, yes, the 1% richer, while holding working families down. And so I stand in firm opposition to fast-track authority and any final deal that sacrifices American jobs and environmental protections in the name of international corporate profits. This must be defeated. Finally, as many of us are talking about tonight, we have 1.4 million people who did not receive their unemployment compensation checks this week. The Republican Tea Party House has totally abandoned these people who are living on the edge. They want to work. They want to work. And so it's incumbent upon us to do the right thing on behalf of these people and immediately extend unemployment compensation. First of all, it's the correct thing to do. It's the American thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. But also it's economically wise to do this. And so we hope that during the district work period next week that Republicans hear from their constituents, because it's not only Democrats who have people who have lost their unemployment compensation. Republican constituents, all Americans who are seeking to work and who want to work and who need that bridge over troubled waters, they lost their unemployment checks also. And so I hope that for those who are people of faith, that they really draw from their faith and understand that here's the moment, now is the time to think about the least of these and to remember that we are our brothers and we are our sisters' keeper, and we need to pass unemployment compensation right away and then move forward and increase the minimum wage, and hopefully one day increase the minimum wage to really a living wage, because that's what the American people deserve. Thank you again for your leadership, and thank you for giving me the chance to be with you tonight.
No, absolutely, Representative Lee. Thank you so much, not only for talking about the fast track and the wage erosion that's going to come out of that for the American people, but for all the words as we talk about fast track and the need to stop it, because if that goes forward, we're going to lose our voice, which means the people lose their voice in trade agreements that are going to have such widespread ramifications. So thank you so much. I now would love to yield some time to my colleague, someone who has been an outstanding member of this body for so many issues. This is my 1 year here. Every time there's been a major issue, there's been someone at the forefront of it, and so often it's been Representative Rosa DeLauro. She is leading our efforts to make sure that we expose what fast track is really about. And I would love to yield some time to Representative Rosa DeLauro from the state of Connecticut.
I want to thank my colleague and just say we really owe you a debt of gratitude. I know what it means. I've served in this body for, this is my 24th year, and years ago I would spend my days in terms of 1-minute speeches and my evenings in special orders, and I know what it means and the kind of time and effort it takes, but it's about your values and who you are, and the number of people that you attract to come down and talk about these very critical issues. So we owe you a debt of gratitude for spearheading this effort. You know, every generation of leaders in this institution has faced their own time of testing, whether it's an economic panic, Great Depression, slavery, Jim Crow, Civil War, World War, Cold War. There are times when our country is confronted with a crisis that poses an existential threat to our nation and our way of life. And Congress needs to stand up and act. The test of our time is inequality. It is not too much to say that inequality threatens the continued existence of the middle class in America, and even the American dream itself. The question before us now is, are we going to continue to be the land of opportunity, social mobility, and the nation that forged the largest middle class in human history during the 20th century? Or are we going to become a nation of very few haves and millions of have-nots? The Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis once said, and I quote, "We can either have democracy in this country or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both." The current trend lines on inequality should serve as a wake-up call to everyone in this institution. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office in 2011, while the top 1% of Americans have seen their income triple over the past 30 years and now make 23% of the total, middle working-class Americans have seen their wages stagnate and median income fall. The year after that report, 2012, saw the highest corporate profits after taxes and the lowest salaries and wages as a percentage of our gross domestic product. And this is in our history. The inequality we see in America today is not a crisis because some are rich and many are not. It is a crisis because the compact has been broken that allowed hard work to pay off and allowed future generations to do better. As a result, the middle class in America is under siege. It used to be that through hard work, access to opportunity and education, a working class family could move up the ladder in America. They could buy a home, send their kids to college, have money to take an occasional vacation, and know that when they reached retirement that they would be okay. It's a story of my parents and probably yours, who worked hard all their lives so I could go to college, follow my aspirations. That is the American dream. For far too many families, that dream is fading away. American workers are being squeezed, their paychecks have stagnated, their benefits cut, their homes are debt traps, their job security has been weakened, their wage and hour protections have been violated, and the safety net under them to help them back on their feet in case they slipped is being willfully shredded by some members of this body. So yes, inequality is the crisis of our time. History will judge this Congress terribly if we do not do everything in our power to restore the middle class in America, to create good, well-paying jobs at home, ensure steady, rising wages, promote opportunity and upward social mobility. There are many things that Congress can and should do to remedy this crisis. We can stop trying to savage the safety net by cutting unemployment insurance and food stamps. My colleagues have talked about 1.3 million people without unemployment benefits. And the temerity of leaving this institution, going home for the holidays, having a wonderful time with your families. And no one denies that you should have time with your family. But to leave these people on the roadside by themselves with nothing to be able to take care of themselves or their families, that's not the United States of America. That's not the Congress. That is not who we are or what we are about. We can pass a budget in this place that invests in our future, in our fundamental priorities, education and job training. And we can't, in this nation of bounty, talk about cutting food stamps. $8 billion, $9 billion, $20 billion, $40 billion. It's wrong. It is wrong. We can support initiatives that create jobs, grow the economy, infrastructure, manufacturing, biomedical research. We can pass a comprehensive economic agenda for women and families that reflect the way that Americans live today. And we can recognize, as Lyndon Johnson did 50 years ago with the war on poverty, that the federal government plays a hugely important role in alleviating hardship and inequality, and we should do everything that we can to support these efforts. And given the deep hole we're in, one of the most important things we can do is stop digging. Namely, we can think twice, again, about extending the unemployment benefits. But further, we think twice before signing off on another free trade pact, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that threatens to aggressively accelerate the inequality and job insecurity that Americans are already experiencing. We have seen this movie. We know how it ends. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and we know how that affected our economy and hurt our workers. So many of us were here during that debate. We cried the night of that vote because of what we knew it was going to mean to workers in the United States. And the recent study estimated that as much as 39% of the observed growth in U.S. wage inequality since NAFTA is attributable to trade trends. Since NAFTA went into effect 2 decades ago, the share of national income collected by the top 10% of Americans has risen by 24%. The top 1% share has increased by 58%. Meanwhile, manufacturing jobs to help forge America's middle class have been aggressively offshored. Millions of manufacturing jobs have disappeared in our country. They've been replaced by low-wage service sector work. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 2 out of every 3 displaced manufacturing workers who was rehired in 2012 experienced a wage reduction, most of them more than 20%. Despite the trends, we are now being urged to pass fast-track legislation, introduced last week by Senators Baucus and Representative Camp. Grease the wheels of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This agreement with 11 nations in the Pacific is of unprecedented scope, and it threatens to be NAFTA on steroids. Even this agreement, the agreement is being negotiated in secret. Members of Congress have been left out of the loop, even though the agreement will create binding policies on the future Congress in countless areas. We have the evidence that suggests that this agreement will only accelerate economic inequality and job insecurity for American workers. We're being told that we need to rubber stamp it, that it's vital. 9 out of 11 nations in this agreement have wage levels significantly lower than ours. If there is pressure in any direction on already stagnant wages, it will be down. Harold Meyerson, and I wind up with this, Harold Meyerson wrote in a very poignant column in today's Washington Post, when the case for free trade is coupled with the case for raising U.S. workers' incomes, it enters a zone where real numbers and real Americans' lives mattered. In that zone, the argument for the kind of free trade deal embodied by NAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership completely blows up. Such deals increase the incomes of Americans investing abroad, even as they diminish the incomes of Americans working at home. They worsen the very inequality against which the President rightly campaigns. NAFTA has had a deep and a lasting impact on our communities. It has depressed wages. It has led to offshore jobs. It has meant more economic security, less mobility for American workers. It has fed a rising tide of inequality that threatens to engulf the middle class in America for good. We cannot continue down this path that pushes that American dream into oblivion. And I want to say to my colleagues and others, and I apologize for taking so much time, but we need to understand it is not one program here, one program there. This is a pattern that is overwhelming middle-class America. And unless this institution has done what it has done in the past to change that direction, we will have a nation that no longer has the economic advantages that it has had in the past, and people will no longer enjoy economic security, nor will their families. I thank the gentleman for doing what he does and for inspiring us to come down and talk with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Representative DeLauro, for your absolutely tireless advocacy on behalf of the middle class and people aspiring to be in the middle class. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'd now like to yield to another colleague of mine who is tireless in her efforts. She is the senior-most woman in the House, the longest-serving woman in the Ohio delegation in history, but to me, the most important thing, she's a graduate of UW, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and coming from Wisconsin, that you can't go wrong with that. So it's a real honor to have Representative Marcy Kaptur joining us tonight.
Thank you. Congressman Mark Pocan, you are such a breath of fresh intelligence and fresh energy in this Congress of the United States. I'm so proud of the people of the Badger State for sending you here and for the hard fight that you have exhibited from day one on your swearing in for the improvement in our economy, for the creation of jobs in this country, for the reemployment of all of those who coast to coast are looking for work but can't find it. Thank you very much for your service to our country and for bringing us together here tonight. I would like to say that trade policy is the major reason that America can't employ all of the people seeking work. Our trade policies are the major reason that we can't balance our budget. If we take a look at the additional pressure on outsourcing more U.S. jobs that is going to come because of the recent introduction of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or fast track as it's called. It's employing the same old failed trade model. And that model is when you have more imports coming in here than exports going out, you're in the negative. And when you're in the negative on trade policy, you lose jobs. And in fact, we are losing jobs by the container load. On average, every day, because of fast-track agreements that have already been passed, we're losing on average about 15 American manufacturing establishments closing every day. You can go into any town in Madison, Wisconsin, in Cleveland, Ohio, in Parma, and Toledo, Ohio, and we see shuttered companies. And what's amazing is if you go to Newton, Iowa, and you go see where Maytag used to be located, and then you go down to Monterrey, Mexico, just outside Monterrey, you'll see Maytag operating down there. But all the workers in Newton lost their jobs. That was a great product. And we can look in industry after industry and see the same thing. I've got Bridget helping me hold this chart up, and I'm going to refer to this in a second, and I want to thank her very much. She's a member of Congressman Pocan's staff. The fast-track model was established in the 1970s, before any of us ever got here, as a way for the executive branch to exclude Congress from trade negotiations. How about that? It's just another overreach by the executive branch here inside this Congress and our ability to exert our legislative authority under the Constitution of this country. Now, since that fast-track process was adopted, this failed trade model of executive branch control over our country has racked up over $9 trillion in trade deficits. $9 trillion. People go, why do we have a budget deficit? Well, a budget deficit is only a reflection of our economy not being able to produce enough income to pay the bills, because we've lost so many jobs. And this trade deficit that has gotten worse every year has racked up, since the mid-1970s, $9 trillion. More imports coming in here than exports going out. Indeed, through this period, America has lost nearly, just in the manufacturing sector, 7 million jobs, a third of the manufacturing jobs of this country, because of the fast-track process. And what fast-track means is when the executive branch sends one of these trade deals up to Congress, they tie our hands. We can't amend it. The Rules Committee, shut down. They bring it to the floor. We can't do anything about it because they've negotiated in secret and we can't know what it is. What kind of a crazy process is that for the people of the United States of America? Now, fast-track has changed America's way of life. This amount of trade deficit, $9 trillion, all right, translates into lost jobs. It translates into poor quality goods. I tried to buy a coat over the holiday season. Go find a quality material. Go find it. I'd be real interested if you can. I was just interested how sleazy the fabric has become, how poor the craftsmanship and craftswomanship. And I know the people making that, whatever country the label says, I know they're paid almost nothing for the work that they do. And we see our middle class shrinking with all, and who's making the money off that transaction? Surely not the person making it in some other country, and surely not the person who is buying it here in our country. Free trade agreements such as NAFTA, which was passed back in the mid-1970s, and China PNTR, which was then passed in the late 1990s, and then Korea, which was just passed a couple years ago, were passed under the fast-track procedure. And we were promised that these agreements would create jobs and help balance our trade deficits in an effort to strengthen our economy. It's so interesting to go back and read what the proponents said. You would think if we hadn't passed those agreements, the entire Western world would collapse. Well, guess what? It is. Parts of it inside this country are collapsing. Let me go through some of the promises that were broken. They said NAFTA, which was passed back in the early 1990s, was supposed to create 200,000 jobs in our country. Find them. Because what actually happened was we've lost nearly 1 million jobs. If you look at this chart, the hole that just got deeper in terms of trade deficit related to our trade with Mexico and Canada. The United States ended up being the loser. 1 million Americans lost their jobs because of NAFTA. And if you go to these other countries, you can actually find the plants. I saw Trico manufacturing that used to make windshield wipers in Buffalo down south of the border. And the workers at that company couldn't afford to buy cars, much less the windshield wipers that have to go on them. And the quality of the Trico product deteriorated. Interesting. It's a pattern that's repeated and repeated and repeated. Now, they said that Korea, which was passed just a couple years ago, was supposed to create 70,000 new American jobs under the Korean Free Trade Agreement. Guess what? America's already lost 40,000 jobs to Korea. And all those cars they were supposed to buy from us, 50,000 cars for the millions they send in here, they're not buying them. They're not buying them. There's a huge additional trade deficit now being racked up with Korea because of that agreement. So NAFTA had the exact opposite effect on our trade deficits than they were promised. Instead of helping to balance our trade deficit, NAFTA helped to dramatically increase it. The same was true with Korea. But NAFTA and China, those two countries, if we look at the Mexico-Canada trade agreement called NAFTA, we have accumulated $1.5 trillion of red ink. $1.5 trillion. The same can be said for the Korea deal, and in the year after the Korean Fair Trade Agreement, America's trade deficit with Korea increased by $5.8 billion. Every billion translates into lost jobs of between 4,500 American workers and 10,000, depending whether it was the industrial sector or the retail sector. Enough is enough. America doesn't need any more so-called free trade fast-track agreements because the model is wrong. It is destroying our middle class. What this country needs is investment in key industries such as manufacturing to create jobs and grow our economy. And I wanted to say a word about this big dip right here, which represents what happened after we signed the agreement with China. If you look at the amount of goods that are coming over our borders now, 99.5% of the shoes coming into this country come from there. Come from countries that have no ability to stand where citizens like us can speak freely and have added to the angst facing our middle class in this country. We need investment in key industries, and we know that manufacturing, if there's investment there, at least 2.91 more jobs are created in other sectors, almost 3 jobs for every single job created in a manufacturing plant. So, Congressman Pocan, thank you for bringing us together tonight. We need a new trade model for America, a pro-American trade policy that begins to result in trade surpluses like we used to have after World War II up until the mid-1970s when America had a strong and growing middle class. This is the wrong trade model. We need a new trade model, and thank you so much for fighting for this and for the defeat of fast track on the TPP.
And thank you, Representative Kaptur, for all the work that you've done, and I know you're going to continue to do in the months ahead to make sure that we stand up for the middle class in this country, and I really appreciate your efforts. I'd like to yield some time to another colleague of mine whose background really is as a manager. He was a mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. He's an expert when it comes to budgets and knows how to make sure that we properly finance government. He serves on the Budget Committee here in Congress, and I'd love to yield some time to my colleague, Representative David Cicilline from the great state of Rhode Island.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and thank you for organizing this special order hour and for the power of your voice on this very important issue and for the work that you have done in your early days here in Congress, and thank your constituents for sending you here to fight, particularly to fight on behalf of the American middle class and for families who are really struggling in this still recovering economy. And I want to just spend a few moments tonight to speak about the expired unemployment insurance issue and the unwillingness of our friends on the other side of the aisle to address this issue, and the notion that we're going to leave tomorrow and go back home for a week, take another recess without addressing this urgent issue which is impacting my state, the state of Rhode Island, but impacting Americans all across this country. What's so frustrating about the refusal to extend emergency unemployment benefits is that first, it puts families in a very, very difficult position. These are folks who are looking for work, who are struggling to make ends meet as they navigate a difficult job market, who have relied on unemployment compensation, modest assistance to help put food on the table, to pay their bills, to keep a roof over their head, and have now seen their unemployment insurance cut off. This is impacting 1.5 million Americans so far, and it will impact about 72,000 additional Americans every single week. 72,000 Americans will lose their unemployment insurance, according to analysis by the Ways and Means Committee. Tens of thousands of Americans living on the edge, relying on unemployment insurance to help get them through as they actively look for work, and they're being cut off. But it's not only painful for the families and incredible hardship and really devastating, it's also bad public policy. It hurts our economy because, as you know, Congressman Pocan, folks who are receiving unemployment insurance take that money and they inject it back into the economy. They buy goods that they need to survive, food, groceries, pay expenses, but they inject that back into the economy. And in fact, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that our failure to extend unemployment insurance will cost the economy 200,000 jobs, and the Economic Policy Institute predicts that the failure to extend unemployment benefits will cost 300,000 jobs. So this is not only devastating to families and really imposing terrible hardships, but it's also bad public policy. It's costing us jobs. It was reported today that 2 million children in America live in families who are relying on long-term unemployment benefits, federal unemployment benefits in 2012. 2 million children. So this has a real impact. In my home state, there are 4,900 Rhode Islanders who've lost their unemployment benefits, put out in the cold because Congress failed to act. And to just give you some examples, I had the opportunity to speak with constituents who either wrote to me or called me or I met with in person. I just want to give you examples because we've heard a lot of conversation on the other side about who these folks are who are looking for work. And some of it has been unfair in describing who these are. So I want my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to understand who we're talking about here. One is a constituent of mine, Erica, from North Providence. She's a graphic designer. She has been looking for work and she's laid off, been looking for work, and it's been very difficult for her to find work. And she wrote to me, and we met afterwards, and she said, 1 month of help can be the difference between someone getting a job and getting back on their feet or falling further into debt and hopelessness. And so she talked about how unemployment has helped her continue her job search and whether or not it was going to be that and hopefully landing a job or whether it was going to be falling further behind into greater debt and a greater sense of hopelessness. I met with a constituent of mine, Rhonda, from Rumford, Rhode Island. She's 54 years old. She worked her whole life, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs at the same time, just to make ends meet and to take care of herself and her family. And she has 2 children. And she's lost her unemployment benefits and is worried about how she's going to take care of her family. I spoke just the day before yesterday with Margaret, mother of 4, suffering from Parkinson's disease, who's worked her whole life. She said, I've never asked for help from anybody, but this is the time I need it. And she's lost her unemployment. And so these are examples of individuals, and I know, Congressman, you have examples in your own district. All of our colleagues do. But we saw today repeated efforts. We tried everything. Unanimous consent consideration, previous question. We tried every tactical move we could to force our friends on the other side of the aisle to bring an extension of unemployment benefits to the House floor for a vote, and they blocked us every single time. They're not hurting the Democrats. They're hurting the American people. And I'm very proud, on the Senate side, my senior senator, Senator Jack Reed, has led the fight in the Senate, relentlessly making the case of what this impact is for individuals, for families, and for our economy. It is difficult to understand how seeing the hardship that this expiration of unemployment benefits causes to families and what it will mean to people who literally are wondering, am I going to get to stay in my apartment? Am I going to be able to pay my mortgage? And am I going to be able to put food on the table? These are people who have exhausted their state benefits. And as a condition of these benefits, they have to continue to actively look for work. So this notion that they'd rather get this modest check than have a job is absurd. Every single person I've met with says, I want a job. I want the dignity that comes from having work and being able to support myself and my family. For every job that exists, there are 2 or 3 people
for that job. So we've got to do more to create jobs. And when I hear my friends on the other side of the aisle say, we need jobs, we have jobs bills. Bring them to the floor for a vote. Invest in infrastructure. Invest in science and research. Invest in rebuilding our country. Invest in the Make It in America agenda to help support the rebirth of American manufacturing. There's jobs bills that we can bring to the floor. We ought to do that. And at the same time, we ought to protect people who are particularly hard hit. You know, this is part of the American tradition. You know, on the one hand, we have this, you know, self-determination and this strong American individualism. We also have a collective sense of taking care of each other and looking after each other. That's what the extension of unemployment benefits means. And I thank you for continuing to raise this issue, for giving us an opportunity to make the case to the American people and hopefully to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who will hear from their constituents. And we'll really demand that before we leave tomorrow, that we take action to extend unemployment benefits. And with that, I thank the gentleman for yielding some time, and again, thank you for your leadership.
No, and thank you, Representative Cicilline. You know, when you talk about the 72,000 people every single week, if you think about it, as we try to talk to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, trying to get this vote this week, when you think in Speaker Boehner's district, the largest two communities in his district, Hamilton, Ohio, and Springfield, Ohio, 60,000 and 62,000 people, that's like that entire town losing their unemployment benefits in a single week. In my state, that's like Lambeau Field, almost the entire Lambeau Field every week losing unemployment benefits. That's why we need to act, and thank you so much for your efforts on that behalf.
Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to yield some time to my colleague from the great state of Minnesota. Although those of us in Wisconsin aren't always Gopher fans, we certainly appreciate our neighboring state. Representative Rick Nolan has not only been an outstanding representative in this Congress, but he also was elected, I believe, first in 1974 and served at 3 terms when he was first here representing the state of Minnesota. And he came back to serve the public again because he wanted to make sure that he fought for the middle class of the state of Minnesota. It is my honor to yield some time to Representative Rick Nolan from the state of Minnesota.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Congressman Pecan, I want to commend you for the tremendous service that you have been providing, bringing to the attention the important issues that relate to the working men and women in this country. In particular,